All right, let's get going. Could I call to order the special meeting of the Moorestown Township Board of Education? The meeting was called in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act with adequate notice as provided in the Courier Post and Burlington County Times on February 25th, 2025. Can I please get a moment of silence? Please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you take roll, please, James?
Miss Arcaro Burns. Present. Mrs. Aurora. Present. Mrs. Barnes. Here. Mrs. Fowles Macaluso. Here. Dr. Myatt. Here. Mrs. Morano. Here. Mr. Weeks. Present. Mrs. Miller. Here. Mr. Villanueva.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this is our special meeting with regards to the budget. We do this every year in early March, where the board reviews the budget in public. I know that we have all had the opportunity to meet with James and Courtney over the last few weeks to go over the status of the budget, and so thanks, James and Courtney, for all your work in making yourselves available to give us a preview. So with that, why don't we get going with the budget presentation?
I did not bring champagne. It is a sparkling water.
I didn't even hear it. Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello to our audience. Tonight we're going to review some of the details of our budget and go through the workshop process. A lot of what we'll do tonight will be taking you through how we made some of the proposals that we did, and then Mr. Heiser will do a bulk of this in discussing the actual numbers and the line items. So first, this is the itinerary for tonight. We'll go over goals, we'll do the budget development process, we'll show you some highlights. James will review revenues, tax levy, state aid. There will be appropriations discussed like salaries, benefits, and capital outlay. We'll talk about budget adjustments, and then we'll do the budget introduction, and then work through the tax impact. So as we began to prepare the budget this year, we had three main goals. The first goal was to develop a sustainable budget that prioritizes retaining staff and preserving student programs. So we know in a tough budget year that has to be a goal to maintain what we have. Goal 2, maximizing efficiency by optimizing human resources and physical resources to ensure the greatest educational impact. So again, in a challenging budget year, we wanted to evaluate our human resources and our physical resources to see how we could continue to give our kids all that is great about Moorestown. And then finally, in Goal 3, we want to continue to strengthen student learning through effective support systems, updated curriculum, and targeted professional development. And Dr. Benton will talk a little bit about that tonight. So the budget development process, I think James is going over next.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. So our budget development process starts with goals being created through stakeholder input. Ultimately, you will recall all of our committee meetings for the last 3-4 months have included conversations about some of those goals and any input from the board, but also input internal to the district as well. Our budget manual is created by my office with consultation from, number one, data, enrollment projections based off of our ASSA data that's submitted to the state every October 15th, as well as conversations at our cabinet level about the needs based for the budget for 25-26. School administration develops their building level budgets with input from the faculty and content supervisors. School administration budgets are developed based off of per pupil projections that I ultimately give to them through a process using our enrollment, which uses a 7-year trend to project the next 5 years forward. Central administration evaluates the needs of the district related to technology, curriculum, personnel, and facilities. So those are your departments. And our revenue and appropriations are updated based on finalized numbers. So one thing to keep in mind, the budget is an extremely, extremely fluid process. It changes frequently and often, and a lot of changes are made in the back end of February and early into March, simply because we're starting to get more detailed numbers and firmed up numbers. For example, one thing that you'll see in here is I put in a healthcare increase, which was roughly 10% that I included in the original budget. Our healthcare came in at a 13.4% increase, which caused us to have to go back into the budget process to further look for cuts in other places. It's also fluid in the area of tuition. When we're going through this process, maybe a student is determined to be coming back in the district either this year or next year, and there's potential savings related to that we can realize. One thing that occurred this year is we actually had an out-of-district student, a private paying tuition student, evaluated for 25-26 enrollment, and that was just last week, and we'll be approving that coming up. But that helps us to be able to put another $15,000, $16,000 of revenue projected for next year into the budget. So it's a very, very fluid process throughout the months. Budget development process. So our Finance and Operations Committee here, they've seen the budget calendar attached to every single Finance and Operations Committee meeting for the last probably 5 or 6 months. The bold underline March 10th board budget workshop to discuss 25-26 draft budget, that is where we are currently. So we do obviously the couple of dates above that, which were critical dates: governor's budget address, release of state aid figures. I'll do a little bit more of a deep dive on those in a future slide. But today we're doing our budget workshop with the intent that we still have a little bit of work to do this week to close the remaining deficit on our budget. We're going to have some discussions about that tonight. And then March 18th, we would do our budget introduction, which is when the board is formally approving me to submit the budget to the county for review. The county then takes about a month to review our budget. We have a sit-down meeting with them. They have a lot of questions related to the budget. They go through a very thorough, detailed review of the budget. We answer those questions. They approve our budget with or without changes. If there are changes, we have to come back to the board and communicate that. There typically are not changes in that timeline. And if there aren't, then we come back in at April 29th and we actually adopt our budget. After that process, we are able to open our budget in May, which will start the 25-26 budget process for being able to at least put in purchase orders that will be for the month of July. At this point, I am going to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent.
Thanks, James. So as Dr. McNeely said, related to Goal 3 when strengthening our student learning programs, we continue our biggest part of our curriculum and instruction budget this year is going to be the next phase of our math adoption. So if you remember last year, we decided to do this as a 2-year phase-in for that. So we did grade 6 through 8 last year, and this year we're going to be adopting our grade K to 5 math curriculum, which is HMH into math. So associated with that, you will see within the budget is the professional development to train our staff. We'll be purchasing the additional student resources. We actually purchased our teacher resources this year so that teachers could begin the training process and have that with them all summer. Additionally, we will be bringing in the publisher to do training, and we also have our pilot team who will be helping us through the best practice series and the embedded support teams to help with the launch of the 6th grade levels, which is about 150 teachers and over 600 students. Additionally, as at the middle school levels in grades 6 to 7 and also 8, we're going to be doing the updates for online, accelerated, and the enriched math, as well as pre-algebra. And we are also going to be doing revisions for the curriculums for our gifted and talented programs. Can you advance to the next one, Dylan? So just a quick highlight about HMH into math. We are purchasing a 6-year package as we've done for our other major adoptions in K to 5. This does support 6th grade levels. The focus for this math program really focuses on both content and skills knowledge using math routines. So this is very aligned to the new foundational standards in math that we've had. And it also continues the work that we've done in ELA with small group and partner work, which encourages collaboration and mathematical discourse. Again, I talked about the professional development, and the summer curriculum writing will be 6 courses, and they are full write, so that's 40 hours per course. Any questions on that piece?
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Next up is our technology department. And first and foremost, thank you to Mr. Airy for all of his work related to our technology department, not only putting together the budget and doing it in a fiscally responsible way, but his department does a lot of work during the year when we operate our budget to make sure we're getting the best price possible related to all of our technology purchases, and making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck related to E-rate as well, which is a federal grant that we get money back from the federal government on certain things like switches, some access points, firewall, things along those lines. So in our technology budget, one of the primary drivers is the maintenance of our one-to-one program, our student devices. So we have 1 grade worth of student devices being replaced. We have the replacement of 6th generation iPads that are no longer being supported by the latest iOS system. Replacement of staff laptops. This is year 2. Last year we did year 1 to cut it into 2 different cycles to help the budget process out a little bit. Technology infrastructure, end-of-life primary firewall, which was replaced in 2018, and replaced 10 network switches, which are from 2014. Those would be items eligible for E-rate. Security camera additions and replacements. Every year we put in an allocation for keeping our security system up to date and our camera system up to date where we can. We're very mindful as technology evolves in this area. We look to consolidate our cameras as well. If there's a spot where we maybe have 1 camera pointing north, 1 camera pointing south, and 1 west, there are now 4-headed cameras that you can do variable different things with that only require 1 license as opposed to 3. So Mr. Airy's department does a good job with that. Outside audit of existing technology security controls. So this is a big thing that goes to our cybersecurity. Cybersecurity insurance has been getting harder and harder to get over the years. You've heard me say it in the past. No different again this year. We are still going through the renewal process right now. The cybersecurity renewal process is very thorough. And it's interesting because cybersecurity is really starting to leak into things that it's never been questioned on before. For example, one of the slides that we have in here is about debt restructuring. And you'll recall that we did some refinancing issuance. When we sit down with Moody's or S&P and they're considering our evaluation and our rating moving forward, they ask a lot of cyber questions and cybersecurity questions. So because they want to know what your risk is to that. So this helps us make some informed decisions. Operations. Our capital outlay budget includes Baker HVAC replacement, control software upgrades, and our high school chiller repairs and upgrades. Baker HVAC, you'll recall we had a ROD grant opportunity. That ROD grant opportunity, we did put it through and we did get approved for it. It was in this current year's budget. We unfortunately had some delays with the state. When we switched our architect over, we took another look at that ROD grant submission, and we chose to actually replace 2 other pieces of equipment versus the original application. There wasn't a difference in cost, original application to modified application. We made that decision because the age and condition of the equipment. Well, making that decision caused the state, we had a conversation with them, the state said you got to complete a change order even if there's a $0 impact. Okay, fine. We submitted that change order. It took 4 months to get it approved. So we had a significant delay related to that project. This upcoming summer, we'll be doing some of that work. We'll be cutting in some of the valves, doing some of the pipe work, and potentially replacing a few units throughout the year, with the bulk of that work occurring during spring break in the 25-26 year and during the summer. So you're going to see that money not only in the 25-26 budget, but also the 26-27 budget. Now, what happens when you don't spend it? It just goes back to capital reserve. This is money that we're drawing out of capital reserve. If it's unspent, it just goes back into capital reserve and we draw upon it in a future year. So not a big deal from that perspective. Chiller repairs and upgrades. We've had some issues. Finance and operations is aware of this. We've been reviewing it. We do not have a formal recommendation at this point in time with what road we're going to head down, but we're getting very close. We had a coil break on one of our chillers at the high school. Those chillers were put in 2017 roughly, so they're not extremely old, but they're large units. So we're looking at right now through the manufacturer doing what's called a renewal program, which will replace all the coils on those units, some of the fouled motherboards that are on the units, and control boards, and it comes with an attached 5-year warranty to it, and it should get those units to end of life. To do that, we would draw that money out of our capital reserve. Security, software and hardware to fully integrate digital devices in the district with automated messaging. This is the continuation of SILOX, which we've discussed in the prior budget cycle. School 5 budgetary and personnel system, so we'll be in year 3 with our School 5 system. Just looking to not necessarily a monetary item here, but looking to further the implementation related to that and streamline some of our procedures. Transportation highlights. Transportation's a decent portion of our budget. Contract renewals, we're at 3.57%. That's dictated by the state. Good news.
How does that compare to prior years? Because I know there was a
Yeah.
time where we were seeing
Absolutely, that's a
really
great question.
high increases.
So prior year was 5.87. So it is down compared to last year. 3.57, good and bad. It's good because it's down compared to 5.87. It's good because all 3 of our contractors renewed their contracts. So that's good because typically when you put those back out to bid, you open them up and you see a 9 to 13% increase. That's what we've been seeing historically post-COVID. So that's good that they all renewed. It's a challenge because nonetheless, it's more than 2%. When you're growing your tax levy by 2% and your state aid comes in at a $374,000 increase, you know, it only goes so far when you have this going up.
What's your ballpark for how much we spend on transportation?
There's a future slide that has that.
Perfect.
Driver salaries were reviewed to make sure we're competitive with our surrounding districts. Additional cameras were budgeted for buses. Some of our buses do not have cameras currently, and it's important. We've been expanding upon that year over year. As we replace buses, we are for sure replacing them with buses that have cameras, and we're also getting buses on the ones that do not, or getting cameras on the buses that do not. Facilities custodial maintenance, so routine maintenance, upkeep facilities. So a couple notes here. This is our regular maintenance that goes on a regular basis. You know, if something breaks down, we have an HVAC unit that has an issue, we obviously have to fix it and maintain it. We do that. That's where this comes from. A few years back, you'll recall we created a maintenance reserve. It's a great thing for our budget because that money can come in to help offset these types of costs. You'll see that in a future slide as well. Year 1 of a new custodial contract. So we are in the process right now. F&O heard this earlier today when we had our F&O meeting. We are in the process. You can do a custodial contract for 2 one-year cycles with the option to renew for a 3rd year. We are in year 3 of 3, so we have no other option moving forward. We can't renew the contract. We have to put it back out to bid. That bid is prepared. The opening, I believe, is April 4th, if I'm thinking correctly, right now. So we'll have that number on April 4th on what we look like related to that bid as well. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McNeely.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is curious about what this budget means for our human resources. Most important pieces of our days are our students and our staff. And so one of the areas that we consider is what are our human resource efficiencies, and we needed to do a needs assessment to prepare for this budget proposal. You'll see that I don't have a goal connection on there, and that's because it is related to all three goals. And I wanted to be sure to focus on letting you know exactly how this budget proposes to work with our human resources. So we started with retirements. This year we had many retirements, and that provided us an opportunity to look for growth and progress, meaning that we could see what was happening in our buildings currently and how we were utilizing our staff, and then determine what positions would be proposed in this budget. It was the opportunity for us to see that we needed a tech teacher in the K-3 building that would finish out a tech teacher for each of those buildings and provide the opportunity for some more robust gifted and talented programming. Additionally, we found that we needed a school nurse who would service both the high school for most of the time and then become a district-wide coverage. And then we put floater there because that's the term everyone's kind of familiar with. So as needed across the district, that's where she would be. And that fulfills a big need for us in the nursing program. We used projections to determine what we would propose for our human resource needs. We looked at class sizes. We looked at scheduling, what courses would run, what subscription there would be to those courses, and what students were on what pathways, so that we could make sure that we were continuing with students who started on a pathway, as well as in the elementary, taking a hard look at our class sizes. We considered outcomes of our evaluative process, and this isn't new. We do this every year, annually. So we took a look at evaluations, determined who was progressing in the manner that we needed them to, and of course we determined if there were potential non-renewals that we could factor into this budget. Additionally, we determined some staffing inefficiencies, and we would reduce positions as needed, with the goal that we talked about earlier of trying to keep people as much as possible. And so I know that was a important part of this budget that everybody wanted to know. And I want to assure you that this was a difficult part for all of us, but certainly data-informed decision-making here, where we looked hard and long at what we were doing and tried to keep our existing programming at the high level that it was.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. So next couple slides are going to go more into detail about revenues and appropriations and ultimately where our budget is currently. But before going into that, I wanted to kind of frame some of the significant challenges that we had in developing the 25-26 budget. So in general sense, our tax levy increase every year can go up to a maximum of 2%, with some certain exceptions to that. Use of cap bank. When you generate adjustments, you can use them in that year, or they go to cap bank. This number, 1.4 million, is a 2% levy increase. Our state aid increase was 375,000 roughly. That's good, it's helpful, but I'm going to show you a future slide of why it's not so good. So our total major revenue sources that we had that increased was 1.8 million. Our health benefit increase was 2.2 million. Before we even considered another thing, before we considered supplies, before we considered a single contractual increase on salaries, before we considered the state of electricity and where that's heading, before we considered CPI increases, we were in the hole $300,000. That's a challenge to overcome. Our other insurance lines, our general insurance, our workers' comp, our student accident, our property, our auto, We had budgeted a 7% increase, and it came in at 6%. So that's another $63,000. Electricity, I have a future slide that's going to explain that a little bit further. That's $110,000. And then CPI, $44,000. So before we even really consider the biggest driver, one of the biggest drivers of the budget, which is salaries, we were $600,000 in the hole. That's tough to overcome. The state of health benefits right now is a challenge. It's not just a challenge to Moorestown. It's not just a challenge within this state. It's a significant challenge throughout the nation, really. There's been introduction of new types of drugs that insurance companies have had a challenge figuring out how to work through. Our experience hasn't been the best. On our RX side, we're running at 400%. This isn't new news to our group here. Those types of things are pushing this cost. So that was a significant challenge to developing this budget and getting this budget balanced, or closer to being balanced. Revenue sources. So our main revenue sources are made up of these four categories. Our local tax levy has a 2% increase currently, which is $1.4 million, $1,431,000 roughly. State aid, we initially budgeted flat, but we had a lot of concerns going into the state aid process. The state aid process is typically the last week of February. The governor holds his budget address, and the next day or within 48 hours, we get our state aid memo or state aid notice. Before that, we had the state release a memo to us, and that memo pretty much said, expect no more than a 3% decrease. Well, that's different. We didn't get that in prior years. So there was almost a flag sent by the state saying, hey, something different is coming. And I'll show a future slide to what that is. Budgeted fund balance. This is where I always tell our board that we don't want that roller coaster ride. Budgeted fund balance is composed of two things: the prior year audited excess surplus, so that's our excess surplus from the 23-24 budget. It's ultimately the money that we didn't spend in that year, plus any free general fund excess balances that are projected as of June 30th, and that date should be 2025, my apologies. That line, we have a $9,512 increase, so it's relatively flat. Other revenue sources, tuition. The tuition is primarily through extended day kindergarten, preschool, tuition from individuals, and then tuition from other districts. Our facility rentals, that's money that we bring in renting our facilities to nighttime users of the facilities. Extraordinary aid, there's a future slide that I'll go in a little bit more detail there. Pay to participate in parking fees, those were implemented, I believe, about 4 budget cycles ago. Shared services where we can, banking interest, and dividends. So in all those combined, and I have a future slide that kind of explains that a little bit further, we have a $658,000 increase. So tax levy, that's the primary driver on our revenue side. This is a little bit of a history towards our tax levy. It's a 5-year look at our tax levy. So you can see general fund, that second line there, general fund levy change percent, this line right here, 2.29% in 21-22. How do we go over 2%? We utilize bank cap. 2.29 in the following year, again, utilization of bank cap. 23-24, we did not have any bank cap, 2%. And then 24-25 at 2%, and right now we have a 2% increase into the general operating budget for 25-26, which amounts to $72,982,000. On our debt service side, our board members, you'll recall, we've done a few refinancing over the years. In 2021, I did a debt service refinance, and in 2024, I did a debt service refinance. Doing that has helped us keep these numbers down. So you can see a 2% decrease on the debt service levy change. That's a good thing because it goes into the overall tax impact number. Even though we're going up 2% on the general fund levy, it doesn't mean dollar for dollar that it's a 2% impact. The other major thing that goes in to the budget process and the tax process, and you'll see the tax impact in a future slide, is our ratables. Our ratables are simply the houses that we have to spread our taxes across. It doesn't necessarily have a direct driving impact to our operating budget. I used the analogy in one of our meetings that, you know, if I had for simple purposes, if I had a $10 budget and I had 3 houses to tax and they were equally assessed, I'm going to tax every one of them $3.33. If one of those houses burnt down and again they were equally assessed, the remaining 2 houses are going to pay me $5 each. That's all that ratables does. It just is the base of which pays the taxes that we levy. But when your ratables go up, it can be a good thing because the effective rate is a 1.85%. So it means that the average household doesn't feel as much of an impact on an increase of taxes compared to if the ratables went down.
So the percentage can still be 2%, but on a dollar for dollar
Yes,
aspect, it could be less.
that's correct.
All right.
That's correct.
We talked about bank cap a bit. Do you have a slide on that?
I do.
Okay.
Yep, I do. So state aid. So our board members have seen me present this for the last 7 years. Why 7 years? Well, because S2 was designed to be implemented over 7 years. It was a 7-year phase-in that removed state aid from overfunded districts, and it returned it or gave it to school districts that were underfunded. It was designed to be implemented over 7 years, with the 7th year being 2025. We always were looking forward to the day where our green line met our blue line, or vice versa, where our blue line met our green line, because that would mean that we were fully funded by the state aid formula. Last year was that year. Governor's budget address indicated fiscal year 25 was the first time that we fully funded the state aid formula. Absolutely correct. Correct to Moorestown for sure. 2026, we have a $1.3 million shortfall. Our uncapped aid says that it's supposed to be almost 7.9 million. We're getting 6.6. So although $374,000 of additional state aid is a good thing, it's not what we were supposed to get by the formula. We should have maintained where we were at last year, where we kept following the formula. Instead, our state aid notices, for the first time since I've seen, and relate it back to that memo that we received, implemented a maximum loss of 3%. So no district would lose more than 3% in state aid this year, and a maximum gain of 6%. So no district that was on the positive side of the funding formula would get more than 6% increase. We got 6%. Formula said we weren't supposed to get 6% though. When they implemented that min and that max, they stopped following the funding formula.
So we're like pretty much back to 2019, 2020 in terms of the gap between what we're getting and what we're owed under the funding formula.
Yeah, in that 1 year, it caused that big of a difference. I was expecting flat, 0%, just to put us in the best case scenario moving forward. I can calculate that based off of if we got that actual 7 million number. I can calculate that for you.
I believe it was last year, districts that had money pulled back
Correct.
were allowed to go out one time
That's correct.
and raise that money.
Correct.
Are they not allowing them to do that anymore? Do you know?
I'm not sure on that side, just because I haven't done a lot of research into it. I haven't had to because we're on the opposite side of it. Happy to look into it for you, though, and see if there is, that additional taxing authority on that side. My guess is maybe that they tried to prevent that, because if you look at the bulk of the messaging around the budget message from the governor, a lot of it was about taxes and fiscally responsible on tax increases. So it could be thinking about that, to your point.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was any consideration of that, and instead of that, they
Yeah.
capped the loss,
Yeah, I think there absolutely could have been.
and that cost us.
Correct. And there was a lot of, in the actual budget summary, there's a couple of other adjustments that they made to the state aid formula. For example, they tried to put more focus on what communities can afford by data-driven determinations, mainly equalized valuations and net income in a community. So they made some changes around that could have driven some things as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Extraordinary aid is another big item in our budget, and this is one where we've discussed it over the last few years. And, you want to be as fiscally responsible as you can related to the revenue that you put into your extraordinary aid budget. Why? You don't want to over budget and then not hit your mark, because then you're forced to go back and cut in that budget. But by the way, you can't go back and cut in your budget. Why? Because extraordinary aid's on a reimbursement basis of accounting. You got to spend it first to get it. So I don't know what we're going to get. I don't know until every single district submits their application to the state, and the state figures out, do we have enough to pay for all these applications or not? And by the way, they typically do not. How do they not have enough to pay? The biggest thing that you want to pay attention to is actual percentage awarded of eligible expenses. So number one, there's a cap to the extraordinary aid process. We're on the hook for the first $40,000 or $55,000, depending on what type of application it is. We have that dollar for dollar. After that is when the state says we'll pick up the cost. That is eligible expenses. So in 23-24, we spent $7.5 million. We had $3.5 million worth of eligible expenses. Those were the amounts over $45,000 and $55,000. In
So
that
that-
same, go ahead.
Sorry, sorry if I missed it, but the $40,000 to $55,000 floor that we pay for,
Yes.
is that on like a per student? It's not like $40,000 to $50,000 in the aggregate, and they pay everything above that.
Great question. It is by student.
Okay.
So the extraordinary aid application process, every single application is one student. Dave, did you want to add to that there? I saw you raise your hand, so.
Depending upon if it's an in-district student or out-district student, that's the start of the application, and also that threshold of $40,000 or $55,000, and then it's based on services that the student receives after that.
Yep. It's directly related to the services student receives and the setting which they receive them.
Okay.
And things, for those not aware of the process, this is, when you think about what falls within this, there's three main drivers, three main categories: extended school year, one-to-one aides, one-to-one paraprofessionals, and one-to-one nurses. Those are the primary drivers here. It's not to say that there's a few applications that may differ than that, but those are your primary drivers for students that would qualify in this. So in that year that we spent $7.5 million and we had $3.5 million worth of eligible expenses, we budgeted $900,000 of revenue, and we actually got 2.1. So there is a little bit of room for us to go up in this number. However, you want to be cautious raising that number too fast, because you will become dependent on that number, and you will end up running into a budget year where then you cannot increase this number, and then there's no wiggle room in it. Also, what's concerning about it is in 1920, the state was able to fund eligible expenses at 62.54%. That's not great. That means that the state was short by almost 40%, 38% of the cost. They didn't have enough money in the state's budget to reimburse districts dollar for what they should have been eligible for. That year, the state had $275 million in their budget. The following year, and for those who may have been on the board at that time, there was a lot of conversation around, obviously, the whole S2 legislation coming in. And, you know, a lot of districts were on the winning or losing side of S2. So it kind of created lines of, hey, we're on this side. We're not going to advocate with you. We're going to advocate separately because we're on the plus side. You're on the minus side. We're not going to advocate together there. This is something that everybody could get behind. Everybody could advocate for. And there was some of that going on at this point in time. They increased the state budget to $400 million for extraordinary aid. What happened? They were able to fund at 90%. They put in another $20 million the next year, 83%. $420 million again, we didn't increase, 72%. $420 million again, 61%. Guess what this year was? $420 million. Guess what next year is? $420 million. The number and the percentage is going to keep going down because they're not going to be able to keep up with the increased costs that we're experiencing. If you look at our total cost, 6 million, 5.5, 6.5, 7.2, 7.5. That trend's going to continue. So where are we at on extraordinary aid for the 25-26 budget? In the 24-25 budget, we have $1 million. Why are these numbers unknown? Well, they're unknown because, again, reimbursement basis of accounting, we got to spend all of the money. We'll start this application process in May. It will conclude at the back end of May, early June. We'll actually receive the money in August. 25-26, what we did was we took our last 3 years of what actually came in and budgeted at 75%. It's a substantial increase. Again, being fiscally responsible, we're not recommending any more than that at this moment, solely because coming into next year's budget cycle, we're concerned that if the state doesn't inject more money into this budget, we're going to get very close on what we're budgeting as revenue and what they have. And the last thing we want is to budget a number and then they don't hit it. And we have already operated a full fiscal year and we find out about it in August. Does that make sense to everyone?
Well, I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
So, what do you do if the reimbursement is less than what you budgeted? You just have to make it up in the following?
It's going to be a direct hit because you've already operated the year. It's going to be a direct hit to your excess surplus, and you're going to pay for it in the subsequent budget development process when your budgeted fund balance takes a dip.
Okay.
That's where it's going to fall out on you.
Got it.
Yes. The amounts, so you know, there's an exception to the excess surplus calculation. What's the exception? The excess amount that you received in extraordinary aid versus what you budgeted. So 2.1 minus the 900 or 1 million, that's an exception to how the excess surplus calculation is done by our auditors. It's what's called an allowable adjustment to it. Revenues, other sources. So speaking of extraordinary aid, you can see this purple going up. That purple is fueled by extraordinary aid. That's what's driving that increase there. Our tuition, you can see a slight decrease year over year. The primary driver of that is we keep an eye on students that we receive from other districts. Maybe another district doesn't have a program for a specific student. Dr. Tate, in conjunction with his departments, they go through a process of evaluating that student's IEP to see if we could potentially bring them into our district. When we can, it's a benefit because maybe it's an open seat that we have and now we're generating some tuition revenue from it. We keep an eye on it though, and these students do graduate, and we have a couple that are coming up on graduation. So that's why we have a little bit of a downtick in our tuition. The green bar is other sources. We're going to speak a little bit more about that on a future slide here in just a second, but the main driver behind that green bar increasing is dividend withdrawals from our school health insurance fund, our SHIF, and our joint insurance fund, our GIF. So here's the dividends right here. So first and foremost, what is a dividend? A dividend is something that's generated in a surplus year. When we've run a surplus year in our GIF or our SHIF, their finance committee might meet and they might determine to release some of that surplus back to the districts. That is in the form of a dividend. You can deposit that money and have it there for situations like this when you have a significant increase in health benefit costs or a significant increase in general lines of insurance. You can withdraw upon those dividends to help support that significant increase. That's ultimately what we're doing here. So in the SHIF currently, we have a little over $2.5 million in dividend funds. In the 24-25 budget, we have $900,000 built in revenue in 24-25. So we're withdrawing $900,000 this year of that $2.5 million. In the 25-26 budget, we're withdrawing another $1.1 million. The remaining balance that we'll have in with the SHIF moving forward is $573,000. Per the SHIF Finance Committee, they do not anticipate releasing a dividend this year. It's not recommended at this time. It's not recommended. The SHIF actually ran at a deficit last year for all the reasons that we previously discussed. So they're obviously not in a situation where they're going to release a dividend. On the GIF side, $475,000 in dividends. We're going to withdraw $179,000 in 25-26. We'll have roughly $300,000 remaining in with the GIF. The GIF dividend is about $29,000. It's already included in this $179,000 number. So the GIF dividend that they are releasing this year, we're already withdrawing down upon that. Why I mention this and why I bring this up, number one, it's a big source of revenue in this budget, but it's not a sustainable source of revenue. With our health benefits running at 400% right now experience-wise, I am concerned moving forward that having $575,000 in there is going to create a significant uphill battle budgetarily next year. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the best way to break it down, when I say our experience is running at 400%, it means that for every dollar we pay in premium, the insurance company is paying out $4. So the insurance is running at a loss currently. Does that help you out a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought you explained it great, and officers, and I think that that's helpful for the public to hear it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
So as a result, they jack up premium, because insurance companies don't like to lose money.
Yes, correct. And moving forward, one of the biggest impacts here, Chapter 44 versus Chapter 78 plans, we've had a lot of discussions at varying different committee levels related to that and related to Chapter 44's implications on our ability to negotiate modifications to benefits. There's not a whole lot of room to do so. So it's tough to put in the control measures that might exist on other benefit plans to help. On the appropriations side of the budget, so we're going into year 1 of 3 with our MEA contract. We settled that early, so we have that budgeted for and fully in the budget. We'll be in year 3 of 3 with MA. Insurance, I've already mentioned, we originally projected a 10% increase on health, 7% increase on our general lines. We got a 13.4 confirmed increase on health, 6% on general, and our student accident came in at 3%. Instructional supplies and materials, those are our school budgets, which are at per pupil allocations, as well as we did ask them to go back to their budgets and further, really further analyze their budget for additional cuts, which was in the amount of 10%. Departmental budgets, curriculum, technology, administration, facilities, and transportation, we've already went through the bulk of those. Capital outlay, I mentioned what's in our capital outlay budget. Some of the driving factors on the appropriation side. So our CPI, I mentioned earlier that it's at 3.57%. So while it might not be a lot of money, it's still, when you can only go up 2% on your revenue with certain exceptions to that, it's a challenge. It creates a hole. Electricity. Electricity, we have a $110,000 increase built into the budget. That increase represents roughly 14% compared to last year. Why? PJM stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. It's the supplier of electricity in this area. They supply electricity to 13 states. They've opened up some new bids, and those bids are not good compared to where they were previously. So you can see PSE&G here with a 17.24 increase, Jersey Central 20.2, and we are PSE&G, Atlantic City Electric, and then I forget what the fourth one is there. But no matter what, and this goes for your home as well as us, nobody is immune to this. There are multiple driving factors to this, some of which are in this tiny little blurb down here that is hard to see. But one of the driving factors is some of the generating facilities have been taken offline over time, whether that's nuclear, coal-fired, whatever it might be. Another factor is there hasn't been as fast replacement of what's been taken off a line. So, for example, in the state of New Jersey, there was a lot of conversation and even approvals for an offshore wind farm, as well as a lot of solar work. It hasn't happened. So replacing that energy just hasn't happened. So on the production side, we have an issue on that side. So we have an issue on the supply side. And then let's talk about the demand side. Well, something came out called AI. AI and the farms associated with AI, the server farms, draw a lot of energy. Some of you may be aware they're opening up one of 3 Mile Island's reactors, pretty much solely to power an AI farm. So we have less supply, more demand. Economics says this, increased price. So that's the $110,000 increase that we have built into the budget for electricity. What can we do about that? We're looking at some options. First and foremost, we have one building left to convert over to LEDs. So always on our side of the meter, controlling our consumption is the first step we can do. Lowering consumption would be primary. We've done that year over year as we started to convert our buildings to LED. Other endeavors could be bringing in an energy consultant to have some discussions about some other ideas as well. There's some other things as well, sensors, large space areas, hallways. Some districts, might have it where every 4th light is lit in a hallway. The second it detects motion, the full hallway lights up. Those types of things are things that we can consider on that side. Total expenditures. So this is from our 23-24 audit. Salaries represents this blue, which is about 63-64%. Benefits, 21%. So when a 21% portion of our puzzle is increasing by 13.4%, that goes to that challenge that I alluded to earlier. Out-of-district tuition. Mr. Villanueva, your question earlier about our transportation department budget, $3.3 million spent, 4% of the overall budget. Supplies, this is our building-based supplies. This is our departmental-based supplies. That's also inclusive of a couple other things. You can see our energy sliver, 1%. We've done a pretty good job at keeping our energy costs down per square foot. That goes back years and years, 10 years ago. Some of you might recall the name Greg McCarty. Greg was very particular with our energy cost, trying to keep it under a certain price per square foot, and he was effective with doing so. He's the one that started the LED implementation in the district, and we've been carrying that forward.
James?
Yeah.
Sorry, before you go on, curricular materials, that's in the supplies line item, correct?
It would be, yes. Yep, curricular materials would be in that supply. Maintenance, custodial, and security is 5.5 million, 7%, and other is 1%. That primarily is made up of some of our professional services, some of our memberships throughout the district, those types of items.
The maintenance custodial, that includes the contracts for that labor, right? So is that
Correct.
That's labor that's not included in the salaries.
Correct. On the nighttime contracted staff, yes. They would be in that maintenance custodial portion, not the salary portion. The daytime that's on our staff would be in that salary piece. Some of the adjustments that we've made to the budget to date. So staffing, new position requests have been adjusted, removed from the budget. We evaluate those on a case-by-case basis based on several factors. Existing staff adjustments, maybe we've had some retirements. Just last week we did receive a retirement while we were coming back from lunch, so we recognized that in the budget process. Leave of absences, so returning some staff from leaves that might be on long-term leaves that we have to add back into the budget because it doesn't roll over. Some staffing efficiencies, and minimum wage adjustments. While there isn't a direct number to increase for minimum wage next year because we're at the final year of the phase-in of minimum wage, the minimum wage law does dictate and say that it can increase by a CPI every year. We don't know what that will be. We were given that number, I believe, in November of this year for January 1. So we've taken that into account that we might need a little bit of buffer there. That impacts certain positions. Obviously, part of MEA's contract settlement negotiations were around this topic, as well as some of our, maybe our EDC programs, summer enrichment, creative minds, those types of programs that come back and we charge a rental revenue to. That minimum wage number could have an impact there that we've been mindful of. Department and building budgets, further reducing those budgets and reprioritizing those budgets and to meet our needs. Capital outlay, reduction in projects. Revenue was appropriated from capital reserve to offset our capital outlay expenses. So typically we start with a capital outlay budget and then we determine what we absolutely need to do versus maybe what's in the 2-year, 3-year, 4-year plan. Once we have that number, we offset it with a withdrawal from capital reserve to come back into the budget as a revenue source that goes dollar for dollar to offset. Our lease purchase. So reducing our lease purchase requests, which resulted in a reduction in our annual payment. We do expect a 5% interest rate on our lease purchase. That's what we've built into the budget. Things that are included in our lease purchase, it's some of our curricular programs. It's some of our technology upgrades that was on our earlier slide for technology. Transportation, we have to replace 2 54-passenger buses. We have to replace 1 24-passenger bus. We actually are looking at purchasing that 1 24-passenger bus now as a method to help our budget for next year. So we're looking at if we can shuffle things around from one budget year to another as well. Revenue adjustments, obviously we indicated that we had our additional state aid. We appropriated our dividend revenue and the extraordinary aid that I had indicated earlier. So our current status of our budget. So we have a 2% levy increase built in. We have our $374,000, $375,000 state aid increase. Those are 6%. Extraordinary aid, you can see, is budgeted at $1.5 million. That's that number from the earlier slide. You can see that's about a 55% increase compared to last year. Tuition, roughly flat, slight decrease there. I spoke about that decrease, what it's related to. We have a couple graduations, but we also did receive 1 or 2 new students for next year as well. that we have in the pipeline. Interest, $25,000 increase. That's just based off of where the market rate is right now. We use typically our last 8 months average to project out the future 12 months. Pay to participate fees, budgeting that flat at $150,000. Rentals, $315,000. That's primarily driven by year 2 of our ESF contract, which clicks into a new base year payment. Miscellaneous, this number is fueled primarily by dividend withdrawals, with it being primarily the shift dividend and the GIF dividend withdrawal. Revenue generation number, $300,000. That is the revenue that we pull in from our EDC Summer Enrichment and Creative Minds program. Special Education Medicaid Initiative. This was a frustrating one. As we started to develop through the budget process, typically in mid-February, give or take, the state comes to us and sends us a memo and says, here's your semi-revenue projection. That's the number that you have to budget in that's the revenue you have to budget in to your budget. With that came a memo the following day. That number for us is typically right around $50,000. Next year, the number is $4,927. It prompted a lot of questions, prompted a lot of people asking things of the local Department of Education, our county Department of Ed, which prompted the release of a memo, which indicated a couple different factors for what substantiates that decrease. One of which indicated that direct services last year were reimbursed at $313 per service. Next year, they're going to be $3.50. Okay? The law around semi, because it's in statute, dictates that if you have more than 40 eligible students, you have to participate. We have more than 40 eligible students. If we had 39 students, we could check a box saying, I waive, we don't have to participate. On a normal operating year, when we get $50,000 worth of revenue associated with this, it costs more than $50,000 to actually do the work of it. It is a heavy workload to participate in this. There's a lot of conversations going on with the state and with our local county Department of Education to ask if this is something that could be considered in the future. Maybe we need to go to 150 students, maybe something more substantial to enable us to waive this so we don't have to participate. It doesn't mean that we would save dollar for dollar, because there's not one person that's responsible for semi. This is something that is really a team effort between our child study team and my business department to ultimately run this program. So it's not one individual person that does all of this work, it's multiple people, but there would certainly be efficiencies gained from not having to do that workload for sure. Yeah. About double. We're in the 80s, I believe. Any other questions on semi? Next up, withdrawal from reserves. So again, this is to offset the capital outlay budget, the capital reserve number. And maintenance reserve, that helps come in to offset our required maintenance, which is the maintenance that we have to do on the building to keep it in the best interest of the health and safety of our students and staff. Budgeted fund balance, not much of a change there. That's that $9,000 increase that we were talking about earlier. Over on the appropriation side, salaries, $52.7 million to $53.3 for $649,000 increase. Our FICA, that's based off of projections that we make. We take our current year FICA, we increase it by a percentage of which our salaries are going up, and then from there we add in our summer months as well, and that's how we come up with that FICA projection year to year. This year, right now, we're trending for about $980,000 to $990,000 worth of FICA expenditures, so that $1,025,000 is a pretty good projection for next year. Pension, that is a projection that is based off of the pension rate that the state gives us to put into a projection, and then we use our quarterly, what's called IROC, Report of Contributions report, to put a projection and a projected number to that. We don't pay that until April of every year, so we're coming up on this year's payment now. Health benefits, there's where you see our $2.2 million increase, 14.07%. Now, it might not come out to exactly 13.4. It doesn't come out to exactly 13.4 because in any given year, our demographics related to our health benefits might change. Maybe we had a family, maybe we had a employee that got married. Maybe we had an employee who got married and had a baby, and they went from single to family benefits. So that accounts for that. That's why we're a little bit above that 13.4%. Tuition, those are contractually agreed upon, nothing different there. Retirement payout, we have an increase of $114,000 on that line. That's contractually agreed upon retirement that is set to be paid on July 15th of 2025, based off of retirements that came in before February 1st of this year. Next up is our workers' comp. You can see the 6% increase on that line. Unemployment is self-explanatory of what that's for. Professional fees, we have $143,000, 6.3% increase on that line. Some of the driving factors behind that line include some of the factors related to our child study team. One of the things that you'll see is student tuition at a 1.12% increase. Sometimes having a 1.12% increase on that line might yield that we have to put money on other lines internal to our district to better support our students that remain in our district. So sometimes we have an increase on this line that might be associated with that. On top of that, we've had some absences over the years that have had us we had to put more money into contracted nursing services to better accommodate for when we have long-term absences related to our school nurses. One of the things that we do have in the budget that Dr. McNeely pointed towards was that additional school nurse that could serve as a floater. That will help that number for sure in future budget cycles. Those are some of the driving forces behind the professional fee increase there.
What about substitutes? Where does that expense fall under?
That would be in the salary.
Okay,
While it's not a contractual salary, it's still, we have to charge it to a salary line,
got it, okay.
but budgetary sense. Purchase services, the primary driving force behind this is our transportation department. When we contract for transportation services, it is a purchase service. You can see a 3.27% increase here. Our CPI was 3.57. It's a little bit less because we found out some breakage in some other areas and maybe we're able to absorb an out-of-district route for next year. That helps bring that number down. Student tuition, already mentioned, that is relatively flat there. That is certainly not because the other districts maintained having flat tuition. The tuition did certainly go up, but again, that's a very fluid process based off of actual placements that we have or anticipate. Our PD and travel, you can see a slight decrease there, 19,000, 18,000 roughly. Supplies, of this $238,000 increase, $110,000 is the electricity. The remaining supplies are department supplies, curricular supplies, building-based budget supplies that go to students. Other, the primary driver behind that other number is our memberships. And then capital outlay, that has the offsetting revenue above. You'll notice that the offsetting revenue isn't dollar for dollar. It doesn't equal 1.3 million. It doesn't equal 1.3 million. It equals usually somewhere less than that by about $122,000. Why? Because we have to have an SDA assessment in our budget every year that comes directly out of our state aid that has to get charged to capital outlay. That's about $122,000. So all in all, the status of our budget right now, we're about $1.2 million in a deficit. So the tax impact of our budget at a 2% levy increase. So our 24-25 budget was at $76,007,511. That's inclusive of our general fund and our debt service fund. Our 25-26 budget is $72,982,000 and $4,374,000 on debt service for a total of $77,356,000. We've had a pretty substantial increase in our ratables. This number was confirmed. I don't want to say necessarily confirmed, but it is the number that the township is using in their budget process as well. We do a good job of at least, collaborating and having conversations about that number, because I want to make sure I'm using the same number that they're using in their budgeting process, because their budget process is a very fluid process where that ratable number drives multiple different things. You can see here that the ratables are estimated pending May finalized appeals. Typically around May 15th is when any township finalizes their ratable number. There are certain laws around that, certain appeal processes around that, added omitted taxes. There's a lot to that they work through this time of year right now. But it's a good thing when you see an increase in the ratables, because obviously, as I alluded to earlier, we have a larger tax base. This is the tax impact of our current year budget, $8,540.49. This is the tax impact of our future year budget, $8,560.32. This is on the average assessed home in Moorestown of $461,000. That comes out to a $19.83 impact on the year, or a $1.65 impact on a month-to-month basis. Again, primary driving factor behind that is the increase in ratables. Because you can see 1.85%, although we're taxing more, we're taxing it across a larger ratable, 1.86%. So it's roughly the same tax percentage, the same tax impact as the prior year.
Do you remember what it was last year?
I could pull that up. I believe last year was somewhere around $200 to the average assessed home. There was a ratable decrease last year, which had a little bit of a larger tax impact.
Okay.
But I believe it was right around $200, but I can pull that up.
No,
for you.
that's all right.
Debt service. So we've talked about this a little bit. We've done some refinancing related to it. It's always important for board members to understand where we are currently related to our debt service. So our first debt issuance was issued in 2003. It was refinanced in 2012, and it was refinanced again in 2021. This was the first round of refinancing that I did in 2021. It was originally used for renovations at the high school, Wams, Baker, Roberts, South Valley, and to acquire Bridgeboro Fields. $29.1 million was issued. $5.9 million remains outstanding. Our final payment is January 15th of 2029. Our 99 issuance was refinanced in 05 and then again in 2015. It was used to build UES and do various renovations at the high school and WAMs. $29.2 million issued, $4.4 million outstanding. Final payments January 1st, 2029. 2014 issuance was the one that we just refinanced in 2024. It was originally used for renovations at Roberts, South Valley, Baker, UES, WAMs, and the high school. $29.1 million issued, $17.1 million outstanding. Final payment date on that debt is July 15th of 2036. The first two are the ones that we allude to when we talk about debt coming off of our books and preparing for that.
Do you know, this is a bit of a tangent, but in the 2003 issue, do you know if it was the 2003 or 1999 issuance that the bus depot went into the high school?
I can certainly find that out for you.
That, the maintenance bay, like in the high school?
Yeah, I can certainly find that
Just
out.
curious.
If it was in the first or second issuance. Yep, I'll look into that for you. This is the this is the impact of our debt service refinancing. The blue line is our total debt that we had remaining before the refinance. And those, not total debt, but those are our total debt payments in those fiscal years. So this is inclusive of our principal and our interest. And the orange line is after the refinancing process. It's kind of no different than when people refinance their home. Typically, if you have a better interest rate, you can do more creative things related to it. So that's what we did. Some of the items to consider closing the remaining deficit, and we'll have some further discussions on this. We look back to our department and our building budgets. Our departments are still doing that process and evaluating their budgets still to this day. Just today, we received some more cuts from some department level budgets. Lease purchase, we're still evaluating our lease purchase request for further reductions. Revenue projections, we've talked about that extraordinary aid number and where that stands and where that is today. I don't anticipate any further adjustments to that simply for all the reasons that we discussed earlier. We're currently still reviewing our tuition balances and fee-based programs, and one of the things that we can review is any of our fee-based programs. Is the fee substantial? Is it the right fee for the services provided? Is it the right fee, and is the fee being adjusted in a timely manner to make sure it's staying up with our appropriations and our costs to run certain programs? Some of the items that we've considered in the past to balance the budget, some transportation adjustments, maybe it's the courtesy busing, co-curricular and athletic activity adjustments. We've started the process of having a pay to participate program. You know, does it make sense to revisit that and expand upon it, or revisit the fee structure associated with it? Bank cap, we do have bank cap that has been generated by previous healthcare adjustments in prior budgets. So when you generate bank cap, there's really three ways you can do it. Either you don't go to 2%, so if you go 1% of a tax levy increase, the 1% that you didn't tax goes to bank cap. An enrollment adjustment, you had certain growth in enrollment that's predicated and based off of ASSA numbers, or October 15th student counts. So that number is given to us by the state. We do not have enrollment adjustments in this budget. We have had them in the past, but we don't have it in this budget cycle. And health benefit adjustments. Health benefit adjustments are pinned to the state health benefit plan increases. The state health benefit plan increase for next year has a 14.9% increase. The health benefit adjustments that we do have in our bank cap are representative of amounts that were generated in the 24-25 budget cycle and the 23-24 budget cycle. When you don't use them, they go to bank cap and they remain there for 3 subsequent budget cycles. If you choose to use them in any one of those budget cycles, the number and the amount that you use becomes directly part of your tax levy for the foreseeable future. It's not a separate designation of the tax levy. It's just part of the tax levy moving forward. If you choose not to use it in those 3 years, it expires, and your ability to tax above 2% expires with it, unless you have other years where you have bank cap. Are there any questions on the bank cap? Because there's a lot of nuances to that. Sure. Yeah, it's very much based on scenario and what's going on. So let's, maybe we'll use the example of out-of-district tuition that we get from another district.
Another clarification, when you say tuition, it's out-of-district tuition that is for special services, and then it's our out-of-district who are just voluntarily coming to the district.
Yeah, there's private paying, some of our staff that come in by contractual agreements. So the tuition that we charge is based off of, once we develop this budget and we implement this budget, there is a tuition calculation. So the budget software actually calculates every bit of tuition that we need on a per pupil basis. So for example, our MD tuition might be $50,000 because of certain increased services in those types of programs. That legally, statutorily, we cannot charge more than that. We can charge less, but that's the amount that we have to charge. Beyond that, when there is a student that we are accepting in, we do it where we charge based on the needs and the services being provided. So if there's a paraprofessional associated, that cost is passed on to the district to pay that cost. Correct, correct.
About how many out-of-district kids are there?
In district right now?
I was just looking for a ballpark, I have zero idea.
I can pull it up for you. I believe right now it's probably in the 10 to 15 ballpark. Yeah. Yeah, from my projections, I remember it being somewhere in that 10 to 15. But I can get you the exact number.
So on bank cap, we've got we'll call it 2.9 million in bank cap available for the 2025 budget. You can use it for up to 3 years. When does that expire?
It's a great question. We don't have any expiring this year. Next year, we have roughly 400,000 expiring. I can get you the exact number. The next year after that, we have roughly 630,000. And then the remaining amount is what's being generated in this budget that will go for 3 budget cycles after this.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this slide?
Sorry. And the bank cap that we've accumulated, it's not due to enrollment, it's not due to taxing below 2% in a prior year, it's related to health benefit?
That's accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, all 3 years are related to health benefit adjustments.
So, when you showed on the one slide that we were at 2.29 for the tax levy, you said that was due to pulling out of bank cap. How does
Yeah.
that work? How does that factor into the tax levy?
It's there. It's there moving forward. So that year where you saw a 2.29% increase, the amount that we withdrew from bank cap that year, that 0.39%, goes directly into the tax levy and it stays there. It's part of the tax levy moving forward. The theory behind that and the reasoning behind that, it's not like a separate dedication that, it's a 1-year type thing or it's something that reverts. The type of adjustments that are generated through to go to bank cap, enrollment adjustment or healthcare benefit adjustment, theoretically aren't amounts that are ever going to decrease in your budget and ever going to come off of your budget. Now, in any 1 year, I personally haven't lived through a budget cycle where health benefits have decreased. Not to say that they haven't ever in the history, but it's certainly not a market that's been trending towards that. So when it's used, it just becomes part of your tax levy moving forward. That's accurate. You're correct. It's a compounding impact. Correct. Yes. Any other questions on this slide? Any other questions in general? I think the next step is we did want to go to executive session and talk about some confidential personnel matters.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments or questions? Thanks, James, as always, and everybody involved. I know it's a months-long process that involves everybody at all levels, so thanks for putting it all together. I know there's still some work to do, but we're certainly close, and I know it can be the last, getting those last few yards to the end zone can be the most challenging, so thanks again for all your work.
I'm not sure if you want to do public comment before.
Why don't we do that? We'll do public comment, because we have to go into executive briefly, well, probably about a half hour, 45 minutes. But why don't we do public comment now? So I'll make a motion to open public comment. All in favor? You know the rules.
Is this on? Okay. Cheryl McCopolis, 5 Walnut Court. I came, so I figured I'd say something. I do appreciate all of the work that you all do on the budget. I know it is quite a balancing act, probably more so a juggle than a balancing act. In the past 11 years, I've never seen a budget where there was extra money to do additional things, but I did just want to make one comment. 3 years ago, when our beloved Officer Wright retired, we were fortunate at that point to be able to take his retirement and turn that into 3 SLEOs that have been an amazing addition to our district. The plan at that point was to try and expand that to 1 per campus as the goal. And so it is slightly disappointing not to see that even mentioned through the process. So understand that there are other security enhancements baked into the budget, but there's nothing more valuable than having officers at each of our schools, and I would hope that the schools themselves would actually agree to that as a budget item. So I would just ask, knowing how tight things are, maybe there's some cushions under couches, coins under couch cushions? That didn't come out right. But maybe there are places. I think ultimately it's obviously a lot to ask for 3, but even at 3, it's 0.2% of the total budget. So I'm just here asking for that to be a consideration over the next couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, can I get a motion to close public comment?
So moved.
All in favor? Thank you. And we're going to go into executive in the training room to discuss personnel matters, roughly half hour to 45 minutes, I expect. Can I get a motion to go into executive? Sorry? No action to be taken. Thank you.
So moved. Were we supposed to go?
I think Mick
into
had the motion.
Oh,
Is that a second from Danielle?
Sure.
Yeah. All in favor? right, can I get a motion to go back into public session? All in favor? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Thank you, have a good night.